Hello and welcome to Vyas, India's only higher education channel. I am Amrita Ghosh. As a media professional, mass communication has been a subject after my heart for over 1.5 decades. Let us begin today's lesson by exploring the true nature of mass communication and its effects on the individual, the society, and the global economy. Actually, we are talking of how it is affecting and changing our lives every day. Okay, let us start with answering a simple question. What is communication? Communication, in its simplest form, is a human relationship involving two or more persons who come together to share, to dialogue, and to commune, or just be together, say at a festival or at a mourning. As all of us experience, it is an ever-continuing process and an integral part of the world of all living things. In fact, the need for communication is as basic as hunger for food and drink. This observation is also true for animals, birds and bees, as well as for other land and sea creatures. The singing and chirping of birds, the croaking of frogs, and the many visual and olfactory signals among birds and bees are all forms of communication, some simple and some others very highly sophisticated. The dance of the honeybee, for instance, is an advanced means of communication, for it conveys to other bees the precise direction and distance of the place where nectar will be found. So we can safely say communication is both an individual as well as a social need. Communication helps us to share experiences. The severest punishment for a child is to be isolated, to be left alone and not to be spoken to. Imagine how you would feel if the world stopped communicating with you. There is enough research to demonstrate how life processes wither and die when communication is halted. The right to communicate is also essential to human dignity. It is communication that ensures a just and democratic society. Derived from the Latin word communis, meaning common, communication is a synonym for interchange, for dialogue, for sharing, for interaction or communion. It is the passing of meaningful messages and the receiving of feedback. Writer and academic Dennis McQuail, who authored a book called Towards a Sociology of Mass Communication, states that human communication is the sending of meaningful messages from one person to another. These messages could be oral or written, visual or olfactory. He also includes laws, practices, customs, ways of dressing, gestures, military parades, and flags as methods of communication. Human communication went through many stages of development. At first, this development was driven by the process of mankind's evolution, from the lower species to a more developed being. Later, it was also driven by technological innovations. Let us now look at the stages of communication. First, we look at the age of signs and signals. Prehistoric humans were physically unable to talk. Communication was limited and determined by instincts. It was the age of signs and signals. Drum messages, smoke signals, music, dance, and so on. This was followed by the age of speech and language. Man's first big achievement was speech and language. From non-verbal gestures, grunts, and grimaces to being able to verbalize his needs was a very big achievement for man. It gave him an eminent position over others. Growth of different languages gave birth to different expressions that created distinctions within communities. Certain languages acquired the traits of others. For example, the language of conquerors was absorbed into the local dialect. This then became the language of administration and commerce. This was followed by the age of writing. About 5,000 years ago, hieroglyphic writing was developed by the Mayans and the Chinese. They used pictures with a standardized meaning. The Sumerians developed a different form of writing that represented sounds by symbols. This allowed information to be stored and for traditions to be passed on in writing. Clay, stone and later papyrus was developed and used as a portable media. Writing gave permanence to the spoken language. Writing was slow to develop. This was mainly because the clergy, as they were virtually the seats of power, wanted it to be their sole privilege. After that came the age of printing. In the 1st century AD, China invented paper. In the 8th century, the Arab world began to manufacture paper. In the 15th century, the Gutenberg press was invented and printing began in Europe. As a consequence, information could be copied much faster and with far fewer mistakes than before. Availability of information was no longer restricted to the Roman Church and to the nobility, but open to a wider section of European societies. This was the basis for further historical development that culminated in the 30 Years' War. Books were followed by the development of pamphlets and then newspapers in the 17th century. Some newspapers began to be edited by the then subjugated Asians and the Africans, in spite of severe opposition. Revolutionary journals began to see the light of day and enjoyed a wide readership. Subsequently came the mass communication age. It was only in the 19th century that communication was determined by several media forms. The most important form was the print media. Newspapers burst onto the scene. This was supplemented by the growth of the telegraph and the telephone. The introduction of radio, film and television in the 20th century finally saw the emergence of the mass communication era. Mass communication is generally identified with these modern mass media. But it must be noted that these media or individual mediums are only the technology and must not be mistaken for the phenomenon of communication itself, which is the process of creating the information which will then be relayed through the mass media to large segments of the population at the same time. Today we are all witness to the age of information revolution. Since the 20th century, rapid technological inventions and innovations happened. At present, we are living amidst an information revolution. As digital communication technology has developed, integrated multimedia applications are now possible. Consider the mass media menu that an Indian has today. Instead of 1 or 2 national channels, most Indians today receive more than 50 channels. Radio in urban areas deliver dozens of stations. Satellite radio probably brings in a few more. And video streaming on the web or internet is carried out by quite a few broadcasts. The advent of home computers, VCRs, DVDs and CDs have brought in more of the global world to the average Indian. See how the internet has changed our lives. It is being used by Indians to interact with each other and also to source news and entertainment from all over the world. The print media also has a wide variety, and one could choose on reading whatever they want, as now even niche magazines are available to suit everyone's tastes and needs. Research indicates that most of us typically spend an enormous amount of time with the mass media. We spend at least 30 hours a week watching television, probably spend about 20 hours a week listening to the radio, and what about the time spent reading newspapers, books and magazines? Studies show that on an average we spend about 8 hours per week reading one of these, both their printed versions and their online pages. Earlier, we used to perceive print, television, radio and internet as different mediums. Today, we see it differently as they merge so seamlessly with new technology coming to their aid. Technology has blurred the distinction and will blur it even more in the days to come. Different types of media have blended together today and are referred to as convergence journalism. Convergence takes place when content that has been traditionally confined to one medium appears on multiple media channels. For example, we can read the newspaper on our mobile today as well watch our favorite TV shows on the internet. The media of mass communication, we can then say, are an integral or vital part of our lives, occurring in a wide variety of settings. Although the newer technologies have completely changed the mass communication landscape, the term mass communication stays relevant even in this century, contrary to what some writers say. Let us now understand why suddenly in this 20th century there appeared a debate about the term mass in mass communication. Over the past 100 years, people largely use the term mass communication, tending to relate it to the size of the audience. In other words, through the media of mass communication, you were reaching out to the masses. This made a lot of sense then. The last few decades have ushered in new technologies. Films and radio, satellite television, and high-speed newspaper presses were providing access to huge populations. Not only were these audiences very large, they were also dispersed geographically, quite diverse in their characters. More importantly, these viewers were completely anonymous to the corporations that created the material. So, the essential reason why radio, television and other such media were considered different from other forms of communication had to do with the size and composition of the audience. This perspective of communication worked very well in the earlier years. But in the last few decades, the traditional meaning of mass communication as something that reached large, diverse groups no longer made sense. Why did this happen? With the arrival of media channels, including the growing number of radio and TV stations, the rise of the VCR, the multiplication of cable networks, and the rise of the web all led to what is now known as audience fragmentation. As people watched or read these new divergent media channels, there were fewer people watching the same content. Now the viewer had a choice in what to watch, depending on his interest. He could watch soap opera if he wanted, or he could watch channels specializing in religion or finance or reality TV. And because with this audience fragmentation, these new media channels do not necessarily individually reach large number of people, in other words, the masses, some writers felt that we can abandon the term mass from mass communication. However, the term mass communication is still a critical part of society. What really separates mass communication from other forms of communication is not the size of the audience. It could be large or small, but the way the content of the communication message is created. Mass communication, or the process of creating the communication, is carried out by organizations working together in industries to produce and circulate a wide range of content, from entertainment to news to educational materials. It is this industrial mass production process that creates the potential for reaching the millions, even billions of diverse, anonymous people around the same time. For example, see how the Olympic Games are televised. And it is the industrial nature of the process that brings various companies working together in the television or internet industries that make mass communication different from other forms of communication, even when the audience is small. For example, for producing and televising Olympics, a company would have taken the help of producers, cinematographers, reporters, video editors, music professionals, illustrators, voice artists, and so on. Let us now explore how mass communication relates to or is different from other forms of communication. Different types of communication are basic features of human life. In general, the word communication refers to people interacting in a way that one of them understands as messages. Communication has been classified into several types in terms of the verbal and the non-verbal, the technological and the non-technological, the mediated and the non-mediated, the participatory and the non-participatory, and so on. However, in the real world, there is much overlapping and mixing of the various types. Let us now see what messages actually mean. Messages are basically a collection of symbols. Symbols organized in such a way that they appear meaningful to people who are sending or receiving them. Think about the various ways that you signal to others what you want to do or how much you care about them. The signals are often verbal, but they can also be conveyed through body language. When Anita shouts with joy and runs into Amar's arms after winning a quiz competition, that's a communication. She wants to share the joy with him or thank him for his support. Amar understands the message in Anita's shout and hug. People who study communication would typically term this interaction as interpersonal communication. Let us try to understand interpersonal or face-to-face communication. Interpersonal communication is an interactional process between two people, either face-to-face or through mediated forms. It is, in other words, a dialogue or conversation that is personal, direct, and intimate. A lot depends on the relationship between the two individuals, their equality of status, the socio-cultural environment in which the exchange takes place, etc. Face-to-face can be definitely considered as the highest, the most perfect form of communication that two persons can attain. It is more persuasive and influential than any other type of communication, such as group communication or mass communication, for it involves the interplay of words and gestures, the warmth of human closeness, and in fact of all the five senses. It is total communication, for it takes within its compass words, body movements, physical characteristics, body odors, and even clothes. Here the feedback is instantaneous and easy to measure. Interpersonal communication could be relational or qualitative communication, in which the roles of sender and the receiver are shared by two people simultaneously in order to create meaning. For example, two dear friends chatting. Situational or contextual communication that occurs between two people in a specific context. For example, two colleagues from the same company trying to discuss how to improve sales of their assigned product. Quantitative, dyadic interactions including impersonal communication. For example, a lecturer lecturing a class. Functional or strategic communication is for the purpose of achieving interpersonal goals. For example, one singer and one drummer trying to create music. When a device mediates in an interpersonal exchange, it is termed interpersonal mediated communication. The device could be anything. It could be a pen, a computer, or a telephone. When you write a letter to your friend or an email or call a friend on the telephone, you are participating in a mediated kind of interpersonal communication. In this kind of communication, the people you are interacting with, you can't touch them. The technology, the pen, the paper, the computer, the telephone becomes the vehicle or the medium that allows you to interact with them. I hope you have gained knowledge and liked today's lesson. I'll see you again. Goodbye.